Right. In previous lecture, we discussed that when there was more and more oxygen availability in the atmosphere, many of the microbes which were running on the anaerobic energy metabolisms, they evolved to develop aerobic energy metabolism. They started using the oxygen to produce energy, and advantage was that aerobic mechanisms were producing a lot more energy or ATP as compared to anaerobic mechanism. So this was the plus side of availability of oxygen to the microbes. But there was a problem also with oxygen, that all those animal cells or plant cells or even microbes which are exposed to the oxygen can interact with the biomolecules and produce very reactive and dangerous atoms or molecules, right? And these are called, what are these called? Reactive oxygen species. Now what is exactly reactive oxygen species? Reactive oxygen species is atom or molecules or radicals which are having a reactive oxygen in it. Now what is reactive oxygen? Reactive oxygen is that oxygen which is having an extra unpaired electron in its outer orbit, right? That is said to be highly reactive oxygen species. Let me tell you how highly reactive oxygen species is produced in all those cells which are exposed to the oxygen, and then we will see, to survive in the oxygen rich environment, how these cells detoxify or neutralize or destroy these reactive oxygen species, right? So again, what are reactive oxygen species? These are those atoms, molecules or radicals which are having an oxygen with outer orbit with one unpaired electron. Such reactive oxygen is very unstable. It is very keen to react with our DNA, with our proteins, with our lipids and destroy them. Reactive oxygen species, which consist of specifically 3 types of components. Let me tell you, these are: number 1, superoxide. This is our reactive oxygen species, one component. Other is hydrogen peroxide, and another is hydroxyl. Other is hydroxyl, and I will tell you exactly how they are produced. Hydroxyls, right? Now, this is superoxide. This is negatively charged, so we say this is an radical or anion, and hydroxyl is also having negative charge, and this is also anion. Because they are highly charged, so they don't cross the membranes. Hydrogen peroxide is basically not charged, so it can cross the membranes. But what really I want to know, that hydrogen peroxide is super reactive and hydroxyl is super duper reactive. If someone asks you what is the relatively less reactive, we will say hydrogen peroxide. And if someone asks what is the most reactive, that is hydroxyl ion, right? Now how these ions are produced when our biological systems or microbes biological systems are exposed to the oxygen? Actually, what really happens, that now you see, this is molecular oxygen. This is molecular oxygen and it is stable. But if you add one electron to it, right? If you add one electron to it, this will convert into superoxide. This will convert into superoxide because in its outer orbit it will have one extra electron. Now, then superoxide can be converted into hydrogen peroxide by addition of one more electron, right? But here 2 protons are also added, right? So this was very stable molecular oxygen. Addition of 1 electron, okay, I will make electron, this is making it dangerous, right? So this is electron, right? Added and converted into superoxide, which is, what is it? Highly reactive molecule, unstable molecule. And if you add one more electron, it means you are going to further reduce the oxygen. That will produce hydrogen peroxide. You have added 2 protons to, right? Now, hydrogen peroxide is also, what is it? Oxygen. Yes, reactive oxygen species. And then if you add one more electron, in the presence of ferrous, this is called Fenton reaction. What is it called? Fenton reaction. So when hydrogen peroxide in the presence of iron is further reduced by giving one more electron, then it will go into, yes, what is this? 2 hydroxyls. Now, these are also reactive oxygen species, and now to it you further add electrons. Now what you are doing? You are further adding electron and 2 hydrogen. It means you are further reducing it. Addition of electron is leading to reduction of the substance to which the electron is added. So what we are doing? We have taken the molecular oxygen, we partially reduce it and convert into superoxide. We further reduce it, convert into what? Hydrogen peroxide. We further reduce it and we get hydroxyl ions, and we further reduce it, then what will happen? And along with that we again add 2 protons. And now you will end up with something very, very familiar. And what is it? Water. What is it? It is water. And now in this reaction, what we have seen, how many electrons we have added? We are progressively reducing the oxygen, right? So whenever oxygen is present in the environment and it comes in touch with our biological system, either animal cells or with the plant cells or even with the microbe cells, right? All these cells are trying to get energy, and in the process of getting energy there are some extra, or you can say, wandering electrons. These electrons can react with molecular oxygen and partially reduce this molecular oxygen. This partially reduced oxygen is highly reactive, right? It has an extra electron, its outer orbit, which loves to react here and there, right? And what we are doing here, what we are saying, that molecular oxygen is highly stable oxygen, right? But it can produce poisonous or toxic derivatives. For example, first reduction and superoxide, another reduction with hydrogen addition, that will lead to hydrogen peroxide. Another reduction will end up with hydroxyls, and other reduction, yes, how many reductions? 4 reductions. This oxygen molecule has received by now how many? This oxygen molecule has received how many electrons? 1, 2, 3 and 4. And now this is ready to react with hydrogen and produce water, which is not toxic, which is very, very neutral, right? And how many waters are made now? Actually 2 molecules of water in this reaction, right? So we can say from molecular oxygen up to formation of water, right? Oxygen is undergoing progressive reduction steps, right? And eventually it will become the component of water and again become stabilized. But during this process, it will make superoxides, it might make hydrogen peroxide, it might make hydroxyls, and these 3 intermediates are highly reactive, right? They are highly unstable. These 2 are radical, superoxide and hydroxyl. This is not radical, but still it is reactive. But most reactive is hydroxyl. Moderately reactive is, yes, superoxide, and relatively less reactive is hydrogen peroxide, right? Whole this can be also summarized in another way, that we can say molecular oxygen plus 4 electrons. How many electrons? 4 electrons. From where these electrons are coming? These are coming from different metabolic reactions in the cells, right? Classically, we can mention during the breakdown of the substrates, right? For example, you are breaking down the glucose and you are using glucose breakdown process for the formation of ATP, either through anaerobic fermentation or through, what is that? Aerobic respiration, cellular respiration, or anaerobic cellular respiration. All these processes, especially aerobic cellular respiration or cellular aerobic respiration, produces lot of ATP, and during this process, when electrons are passing through the electron transport chain, some of the electrons keep on slipping here and there, and these wandering electrons partially reduce the oxygen and convert the oxygen into superoxide or hydrogen peroxide, or further reduction into hydroxyls. They should be completely reduced so that they should become water. For example, here I am writing that sum of all this reaction, molecular oxygen plus 4 electron plus 4 protons, right? And this will go where? This will make, yes, this will make 2 waters. So here what did we learn? If you take totally stable oxygen molecule, diatomic molecule, this is 2 atoms, diatomic oxygen, you need to completely reduce it so that it can interact with protons and make water. For complete reduction of this, how many electrons you need to add? 4 electrons, right? And then with the addition of, what is this? When we have fully reduced diatomic oxygen, and with that we add 4 hydrogens, what is this, protons, it will make water. Now it is clear to us from where the reactive oxygen species come. What are reactive oxygen species? Now we can make the concept more elaborate. We can say reactive oxygen species are partially reduced oxygen atoms, or such radicals or molecules which are having partially reduced oxygen components. Partially reduced oxygen is where outer orbit has 1 free electron, right? So when 2 molecular oxygen, when you add one electron, it is partially reduced, right? Not completely reduced, and you end up with superoxide. One more electron with two hydrogen, you end up with hydrogen peroxide. Further reduction in the presence of iron, ferrous, right? Further addition of electron, it is still partially reduced and it breaks down into two hydroxyl ions which are highly reactive. And if you add one more electron and hydrogens or protons, now the last electron when we add to this system, that will complete the 4 electrons, and then oxygen will be able to react with protons to make water, right? So this is the actually process of complete oxygen reduction. But during this, I have broken down this process into small steps, and during these steps there is formation of superoxides, hydrogen peroxide and hydroxyls, right? And if they are set free in the cell, they will react with DNA or proteins. Not only DNA, but they can react even with RNA. With DNA, they can lead to oxidation of the nitrogenous bases, and with DNA, they can attack these oxygen, reactive oxygen species. They can attack sugar phosphate backbone of DNA and produce breaks there. So DNA can be single strand break, double strand break, or there can be oxidation of nitrogenous bases, right? So DNA can be damaged. In the same way, RNA can be damaged. Then there can be peroxidation of membrane lipids, or there can be damage to proteins also, right? So all these damages can lead to the, death of the cell. So we say that if a cell want to enjoy, let's suppose this is a microbe, if it loves to enjoy oxygen, right, it has one good thing. That oxygen, if it uses through the aerobic cellular respiration, produce a lot of ATP. But at the same time, it needs to defend itself against the reactive oxygen species, which are superoxides, which are hydrogen peroxides, which are hydroxyl radicals, and all of them are highly reactive and they can damage the DNA or RNA or proteins or the lipids and kill the cell. Now, then question is, all the animal cells or plant cells or these microbes which are exposed to oxygen, how come they are living? Why they are not all of them destroyed by oxygen free radicals or reactive oxygen species? Why they are not destroyed by ROS? ROS means reactive oxygen species. I should write it here. It can be called ROS also. So we were talking about that as our atmosphere is very, very rich in oxygen, about 21% of oxygen. So how do animal cells, plant cells and most of the microbes survive? Answer is that during the evolution, these cells also developed very elaborate defenses against reactive oxygen species. They developed the mechanisms, they developed the enzymes which could destroy reactive oxygen species. They developed the enzymes which could destroy superoxide, which could destroy hydrogen peroxide, right? And if these two things are destroyed, then of course, if superoxides are destroyed, hydrogen peroxide are destroyed, then hydroxyls are not made. Now, what are these defenses, right? Remember, those bacteria which do not have these defenses against oxygen, they cannot survive in the presence of oxygen. They cannot multiply in the presence of oxygen. Such bacteria are called strict anaerobes. They strictly live in anaerobic environment. If they are exposed to the oxygen, oxygen act as a kiss of death. They will be dead, right? Why? Because strict anaerobes don't have defenses against, what is this? They don't have defenses against reactive oxygen separation. They only multiply and survive in very low oxygen, which should not be toxic, or very, very low, maybe less than 0.5%, less than 1% oxygen, not 21% as it is present in the environment, right? But all those cells, either these are animal cells or they are plant cells or microbe, which survive in the presence of oxygen, they must have defenses against reactive oxygen species. Now, what are these defenses? There are many defenses, but right now I will focus on these special 3 enzymes: superoxide dismutase, catalases, and peroxidases. These 3 enzymes are universal enzymes in animal cells, plant cells, and those microbes which can survive well in the presence of oxygen, right? So I will now explain how superoxide dismutase work, right? Actually, superoxide dismutase this enzyme act on superoxides. It means this one. Let's see what it is doing to that. Here's the superoxide, right? And which enzyme is working here? Superoxide dismutase. Superoxide dismutase. This enzyme is working, and working on what? On superoxide. Let's suppose it work on 2 superoxides, right? So what really happens, that 2 protons are added to this during this reaction, right? Along with, of course, electron. Now when 2 protons are added to this, it will become how much? There will be 2 protons and 4, because there are 2 superoxides, so 4 oxygen. Now out of this, 2 protons and 2 oxygen atoms, they unite together, and 2 oxygen atom are released as diatomic oxygen. They are released as diatomic oxygen or oxygen gas. Now what has happened actually? This was highly dangerous superoxide ions. So superoxide dismutase enzyme took up 2 superoxides, right, and added 2 protons to them and converted that into what? Hydrogen peroxide and oxygen. Now this oxygen is stable, and this is also, even though this product of the reaction, hydrogen peroxide, is also have capability to act as a, yes, reactive oxygen species, but it is less toxic. This is less toxic, less reactive as compared to superoxides. So what we can see, superoxides can convert into hydrogen peroxide either spontaneously, which we see here, or with the help of an enzyme, or with the help of dismutases. It means superoxides can undergo spontaneous dismutation and produce hydrogen peroxide, or they can undergo enzyme mediated dismutation and produce hydrogen peroxide. Advantage of this step is that superoxides are more reactive, right, and hydrogen peroxide is less reactive. Plus, once hydrogen peroxide is produced with superoxide, usually there is catalase also and peroxidase also. And once superoxide, yes, once superoxide are converted into hydrogen peroxide with superoxide dismutases, corrected, with superoxide dismutases in the cells, catalases are also there. Catalases help to destroy hydrogen peroxide, right? Even peroxidases help to destroy hydrogen peroxidase, right? Now how hydrogen peroxidase is destroyed, right? Look at it. Now catalase is going to work on it. I mean, on this catalase will work, and also on this peroxidase can work. Let's suppose when catalase work on this, how it destroys. Let's suppose here is hydrogen peroxide, right? And what is working on that? Yes, catalase. It is working on this. Now, look, the best way to destroy the hydrogen peroxide is convert it into water. The best way to destroy or decompose hydrogen peroxide is convert it into water. Now, if we want to convert into water, what is there? Okay, let me put it here, that let's suppose H2O2, hydrogen peroxide. If we want to convert it into water, H2O, we can do two things. Either we eliminate the oxygen out of it, right? There are two hydrogen and there should be one oxygen. Or we add hydrogen and we make 4 hydrogen and 2 oxygens, that will become 2 water molecules. I mean, to convert this into water, what we can do, right? Either we add to this, either we remove oxygen and convert into water, or we keep the oxygen to add hydrogens, right? And 2 hydrogens more added, it will become 2 water molecules, right? That is, it will become H4O2. Of course, there is no entity like this. We would say that addition of 2 hydrogen to this will lead to 2 water molecules. Now, exactly how it happens. Catalase does the first thing. It removes the oxygen. When catalase acts on hydrogen peroxide, it removes oxygen. How? Let's suppose there are 2 hydrogen peroxidases. 2 hydrogen peroxidases, it means that there are 4 hydrogen and 4 oxygens. There are 4 hydrogen and 4 oxygen. When catalase work on that, what will happen? That it will convert that into 2 molecules of water. So how many hydrogens are utilized? There were 4, they are still 4. But because there are 2 molecules of water, 2 oxygen atoms are there. But here are, in these 2 molecules, there are 4 oxygen. So 2 extra oxygen will be released as a gas, diatomic oxygen gas. So this is the reaction which occurs in the catalase, right? That how the catalase is working. Catalase basically fuses 2 hydrogen peroxide, and when it separates, it actually make 2 water molecules and oxygen gas will go out. You know, hydrogen peroxide, when it is, for example, there is a colony of bacteria which is catalase-positive. So if you put hydrogen peroxide on that, bubbles will come or foam will form. That bubbles are made of oxygen, right? That hydrogen peroxide added on the catalase, converted into water and oxygen. And of course, if catalases are working, they are constantly converting, what is this? Hydrogen peroxide into water, so they are detoxifying this reactive oxygen species. As I mentioned here, there are 2 ways. Number 1, you remove oxygen, right? So that is what catalase is doing, that it is removing extra oxygen from the hydrogen peroxide and converting into water. Another thing is, rather than removing the oxygen, you add protons to that, add the hydrogens to that. And this function is done by peroxidases. What peroxidases are doing? They take up hydrogen peroxide and they work on it. For example, glutathione peroxidase. So peroxidase is working on it, on hydrogen peroxidase. Now, this peroxidase is working on hydrogen peroxidase, and what it will do? It will add to hydrogen to it. It will add to hydrogen to it. And now these two added here, it will become 4 hydrogen or 2 and 2 oxygen. So they will convert into 2 water molecules. But of course, when peroxidase work, they don't release oxygen. Again, what has happened? That this hydrogen peroxide has been converted into what? Innocent water. So what we can see, listen carefully, those cells, either they are animal cells or plant cells or microbes, those cells which can survive in the presence of oxygen, and of course most of the living cells, just exclude the strict anaerobes. So such cells have universally defense mechanism against reactive oxygen species, because whenever there is oxygen and this biological system in a cell, oxygen will diffuse in, and during that process it may make lot of reactive oxygen species like superoxides, like hydrogen peroxide, like hydroxyl. And these three can react with DNA, RNA, proteins, lipids and destroy the cells. So cells must have a very strong defense against reactive oxygen species to survive in the oxygen-rich environment. And all these cells which survive in the oxygen-rich environment, they are having defenses in the form of superoxide dismutase, catalase and peroxidase. Superoxide dismutase is, as soon as what they are doing, as soon as superoxides are made, they will convert them into hydrogen peroxide, and as soon as hydrogen peroxide is produced, catalase will act on that and convert that into water, or peroxidase will work on that and again convert it into water. What you need to remember is that whenever catalase work on hydrogen peroxide, they release oxygen, but whenever peroxidases work on hydrogen peroxide, they do not release oxygen. Is that right? And what did we learn from here? That when we are going in the next lecture, we are going to finally understand this classification, that why some bacteria are obligate anaerobes, why some are aerotolerant anaerobes, why there are some which are facultative anaerobes, some of the bacteria are microaerophilics and some are obligate or strict aerobes. Why this is happening? It depends on that how all these bacteria deal with presence of oxygen, right? How they utilize or do not utilize oxygen as final electron acceptor in their energy metabolism. This is one thing. Secondly, this classification also is based on that do these bacteria have defenses against reactive oxygen species or not. For example, I give you an example of very strict anaerobe bacteria, right? For example, Bacteroides or Clostridia species or Fusobacterium or Porphyromas species. Now, what are these bacteria? These are strict anaerobes. If you touch them with oxygen, they will die. It means that they are unable to deal with oxygen. These are strict anaerobes. They strictly live in anaerobic environment and they multiply only in anaerobic environment. Why? Because they are unable to cope with oxygen. Number one, they cannot utilize oxygen for energy production, right? They depend mainly on anaerobic mechanisms where they, for energy production, they use anaerobic fermentation or anaerobic cellular respiration, where oxygen is not required as a final electron acceptor. So they don't take the advantage of oxygen. But unfortunately, they have not evolved enough to develop dismutases or catalases and peroxidases. If they have none of these enzymes, They cannot defend themselves against the reactive oxygen species. So these bacteria will be destroyed in the presence of oxygen. So they stay in anaerobic environment and survive only in anaerobic environment. They multiply only in anaerobic environment. Such bacteria are said to be strictly anaerobes or obligatory anaerobes. At the other end of the spectrum, remaining we will discuss next time, there are bacteria which are strict aerobes or obligate aerobes. What is the story of these bacteria? They are evolved very well. They are so evolved and they have developed so modern energy metabolism that they love oxygen, that they use the oxygen for cellular respiration, and they use oxygen as final electron acceptor, and they enjoy the formation of abundant amount of ATP. But they have lost their anaerobic energy metabolism pathways. So they can only survive and grow in the presence of oxygen. If there is no oxygen, they cannot produce energy. And secondly, if they are having such a love relationship with oxygen, of course, then they should be able to detoxify the reactive oxygen species. And such bacteria they are in love relationship with oxygen, as they utilize oxygen very successfully for aerobic cellular respiration, and they also know how to detoxify reactive oxygen species, which means these bacteria have abundant formation of superoxide dismutases, mutases and catalases and peroxidases, right? So these are the basic concepts that how bacteria have a specific relationship with oxygen, right? Again, I will in a nutshell say we should know what is the bacteria relationship with the oxygen in energy metabolism, and what is bacteria's relationship with oxygen in relation to dealing with what? Reactive oxygen species. Further story we will discuss in next lecture, right? We will talk about all these categories of bacteria and related oxygen metabolism, their energy metabolism and their defenses against the reactive oxygen species and their clinical relevance. Thank you very much.